Welcome to the DX Today podcast, where you get facts and no hype. Today, we're taking a deep dive into the pivotal year that didn't just advance machine intelligence. It violently reshaped the global technological, economic, and military landscape. 2025.
It's so critical to get this right. 2025 wasn't just another year of, slightly better models. It was a genuine inflection point. We spent weeks sifting through these comprehensive reports.
Right.
Specifically, this one massive retrospective document. It details the 25 most significant AI-related developments, and our job was really to pull the signal from all that relentless noise.
And the narrative that came out of it, it's crystal clear. 2025 was the year of consequence. The years before were all about potential, about promise. All hype, hype. This year, the theoretical stuff, it finally hit industrial reality. And that friction, it created huge winners and huge losers, and it just completely dissolved that comfortable boundary between the digital world and, kinetic reality. It's a complex, messy maturation.
And that's our mission here. We want to provide you, the listener, with a shortcut, a way to get fully informed about this transformative period without getting lost in the weeds. We're moving beyond the standard Silicon Valley hype cycle.
We have to.
We're going to analyze where genuine intelligence actually matured and, maybe more importantly, how that maturation exposed these profound structural vulnerabilities across the entire global system, from Wall Street all the way to the battlefield.
So we've structured this deep dive to reflect that complexity. We're categorizing those 25 key events into three main themes. First up, the good.
The fun stuff.
The fun stuff, right. The technical and scientific leaps forward that are, objectively beneficial for humanity. Second, the ugly. This is the brutal economic reckoning, the consolidation of power, and that sudden lethal shift of AI into modern warfare.
And finally, the bad.
The bad, the spectacular product failures and the profound crisis of digital trust caused by mass disinformation. It's a heavy one.
It is. But if you leave this deep dive with just one synthesis, it should be this. 2025 was the moment the world stopped debating the potential of general intelligence and started grappling with its irreversible real-world implications.
Okay, let's unpack this. We should start with the genuine good news, right? The intellectual leaps forward. In 2025, the AI race it fundamentally changed.
It really did.
It wasn't about who could train the biggest model with the most parameters anymore. That had sort of become a vanity metric.
A marketing gimmick, almost.
Exactly. The new frontier, the new race, was defined by three completely different elements: latency, reasoning depth, and the capacity for agency.
And that's the key word, isn't it?
Yeah.
Agency. The shift from large language models, LLMs, which could just talk, to what are now called large action models, or LAM systems, that could genuinely think and do. That required a deep, deep architectural change.
So it's not just about spitting back text anymore.
Not at all. The biggest players, the Googles, the OpenAIs, they realized that the pure pattern matching that defined the last generation of models, what behavioral psychologists call System 1 thinking, it had just hit a wall of reliability and utility.
To get to true autonomy, they needed to crack System 2.
Precisely. System 2 thinking, the deliberate, the logical, the sequential, step-by-step reasoning that allows a system to actually plan a complex task and critically self-correct along the way.
And the development that just blew the doors off and signaled that this transition was successful, that was the release of GPT-5, August 7th, 2025.
Oh.
This wasn't just a slightly bigger model.
Oh, not even close. It was fundamentally different under the hood.
And there was this one moment that just stunned the academic community. It basically put an end to that whole stochastic parrot criticism for good. It was a performance of GPT-5 on a very specific, very hard test. The American Invitational Mathematics Examination, the AIM, what was the result?
A perfect score.
And perfect score.
A perfect 100% score on the AIM. And this is so profound because the AIM isn't about memorization. It's designed to challenge the very brightest human math students. It requires multi-step logical planning, abstract reasoning, and execution.
So you can't just pattern match your way through it.
You absolutely cannot.
Yeah.
The ability to flawlessly complete that exam was the proof. It proved that the System 2 integration, that logical step-by-step capability, was a success. It finally gave these models the ability to robustly handle complex, multi-layered tasks without just falling apart or hallucinating.
And the practical application of this breakthrough, it led to a really smart deployment shift, didn't it? OpenAI realized that running this full-power frontier-level model for every single simple chat query
would be insane. Computationally and economically, just completely unsustainable.
Right.
Absolutely. So they got smart. They implemented a tiered system. They segmented their intelligence for different markets, which was a first, really. You had the flagship, the big one, GPT 5.2. That was dedicated to the heavy industrial applications, complex R&D, the most challenging agentic tasks where the cost of compute was basically a non-issue.
But then they brought that same intelligence down the cost curve for everyone else.
Correct. They released GPT-5 Mini and GPT-5 Nano. These were stripped-down, highly efficient versions. They were designed for cost-effective, high-speed deployment in things like embedded systems or simple customer service bots.
So the era of the one-size-fits-all model is over.
It's completely obsolete. The report highlights that 2025 was the year the industry finally accepted that you have to customize intelligence for the specific workflow, and just as importantly, for the cost constraints of that workflow.
And there was another layer to this on a slightly softer note. The focus on human-computer interaction. They actually engineered the default personality of GPT-5. They called it the warmth update.
Yeah, making it more approachable, more conversational. Which sounds like a small thing, but as these systems start moving into really sensitive roles, as tutors for kids, as medical intake assistants, as companions for the elderly, that interface personality is actually a critical factor in societal adoption and trust.
So while OpenAI was chasing this incredible reasoning depth, Google executed what the report calls a brilliant counter-strategy with their late-year release of Gemini 3 Flash.
A totally different approach. Their objective was pure velocity, scale, and most importantly, aggressively attacking the high cost of inference.
They focused on making intelligence not just smart, but cheap and fast.
Precisely. Google's play was as much an economic strategy as it was a technical one. And you just have to look at the numbers again. Gemini 3 Flash achieved a 90.4% on the GPQA benchmark.
Which is, what does that test?
That tests PhD-level reasoning, so it's no slouch. That score was a huge jump from the 51.5% in the previous series, so it validated the raw intelligence. But the real headline, the thing that changed the market, was the operational impact.
Tell us about that cost reduction, because that seems to be the key implication here.
It's everything. They dropped the input cost to just 50 cents. 50 cents per 1 million tokens.
Wow.
With a stunning throughput speed of 218 tokens per second. That commoditized the cost of frontier-level intelligence overnight. Suddenly, if you're a small nonprofit or a research lab in a less-funded nation, this radical reduction in inference cost completely changes the economics of how you can use AI for serious groundbreaking research.
And this low-cost, high-speed factor is the key that unlocks the whole agentic ecosystem we keep hearing about.
Absolutely. This is the crucial connection that people need to understand. An autonomous agent, a system that does things, it doesn't just execute a single command. It performs these recursive loops. It plans, it executes, it checks its own results, it replans, it iterates over and over.
And if each of those steps is slow and expensive,
the whole thing falls apart. If each step in that loop costs 5 cents and takes 5 seconds to process, the entire workflow becomes prohibitively expensive and just unusably slow. By driving the cost down to fractions of a cent and making the response nearly instantaneous, Gemini 3 Flash made it economically viable for these agents to think for longer, to run more cycles, enabling complex, sustained autonomous operations in the real world.
Now, of course, none of these incredible models can run without the right infrastructure. In 2025 was the year NVIDIA decided they weren't just selling chips anymore. They started defining the entire software stack with the release of Nemotron 3.
Yeah, NVIDIA's move into defining the software stack that's perfectly optimized for their own hardware. I mean, that's the ultimate vertical integration play. Nemotron 3, which came in Nano, Super, and Ultra variants, had this key technical innovation, a hybrid architecture. It combined a mixture of experts, or MOE, model with something called Mamba 2 layers.
Okay, let's stop there. Because Mamba architecture, which uses state space models, or SSMs, it's dense, it's technical, but it's absolutely critical to understanding the power of these new systems. Why are SSMs such a fundamental leap over the traditional attention mechanisms we've been using?
Okay, so traditional transformer models, the ones that have powered this whole LLM revolution up to now, they use something called an attention mechanism. And the problem is the computational cost of that mechanism rises exponentially with the length of the input data, what we call the context window.
So if I give an old model a 1 billion word legal document to analyze, It just chokes by the time it gets to page 800.
That's the perfect analogy. It slows down exponentially,
Yeah.
becomes incredibly expensive to run. Mamba architecture, however, it allows for linear scaling with the sequence length,
So the cost goes up predictably.
predictably and slowly. This one technical distinction allowed Nematron 3 to handle these massive contest windows, up to 1 million tokens, without that crippling computational overhead. It can read that entire legal document, and the last page processes just as fast and efficiently as the first page.
That dramatically increases the efficiency of any kind of complex reasoning task. And the result of that efficiency.
The result was that Nematron 3 Nano offered 4 times the token throughput of its predecessor.
Which leads to a crucial shift in the market, on-premise capability.
Exactly. This efficiency meant that for the first time, enterprises could run powerful, reasoning-capable agents on their own local hardware. It reduced their dependence on those massive and frankly often vulnerable cloud providers like AWS and Azure. NVIDIA is making its hardware the absolute centerpiece of the entire AI ecosystem, from the silicon all the way up to the software and the agency.
Okay, let's shift gears now to what was, I think you'd agree, arguably the most objectively humanitarian story of the year, the acceleration of the life sciences. The report details how this concept of a biological co-scientist became real, and it started with AlphaFold 4.
Yeah, AlphaFold 4 from Google DeepMind. It solved the next layer of the biology challenge. Previous versions had more or less mastered the static protein folding problem, predicting the 3D shape of a single protein chain, which was amazing in itself.
At a Nobel Prize-winning achievement.
Absolutely. But AlphaFold 4 moved far beyond just predicting structure. It moved to simulating system interaction.
So it's not just predicting a static shape, it's simulating the interaction across the entire biological system, DNA, RNA, ligands, proteins.
This is the key that unlocks modern drug discovery. By being able to simulate how a potential drug molecule, a ligand, will bind to a specific protein before you ever step foot in a wet lab, you can bypass the most time-consuming and expensive parts of the development process. Researchers can instantly rule out thousands of ineffective candidates with a click.
And how does that translate to actual time savings in the real world?
It's massive. It reduces what they call hit-to-lead discovery timelines from months or even years down to mere weeks. This is especially crucial for rare or complex disorders where the traditional research pathways just weren't economically viable for pharmaceutical companies.
And there was the update to the database, too.
Right, the simultaneous update to the AlphaFold database, which released over 200 million new protein structure predictions. It effectively turned biological R&D into a data science problem rather than a chemistry problem.
And right alongside that was the introduction of another DeepMind project, this multi-agent system they called the AI Co-Scientist, which was published in Nature. That isn't just a powerful database for scientists to query. This was like having a digital colleague.
It's a completely different way of thinking about the scientific method. This system, built on the Gemini 2.0 foundation, operates using this sophisticated generate, debate, and evolve architecture. You can think of it as a virtual, tireless team of thousands of scientists that can simultaneously investigate thousands of potential solutions, formulating novel hypotheses in parallel.
So this is a huge shift. Instead of a human scientist generating the hypothesis and then asking the AI to confirm it with data,
the AI is generating the initial, novel question. It's proposing avenues of research that humans might not have even considered. The human scientist's job changes from hypothesis generation to experiment verification and validation.
And did it work?
The validation tests were incredible. The system proposed multiple new candidates for acute myeloid leukemia treatment that actually showed tumor inhibition in vitro at clinically relevant concentrations. It also identified new, previously unknown epigenetic targets for liver fibrosis. The AI is generating the hypothesis before the human even collects the data, and it's dramatically compressing that exploratory phase of science.
Okay, so we have to transition now from the genuine optimism of that scientific acceleration to the brutal, sobering reality of the market. The technology was soaring, but the economics of actually scaling that technology. It faced a massive reckoning in 2025. This was the year of the AI bubble jitters.
Yeah, the problem was this fundamental and, frankly, unsustainable imbalance. We saw a massive surge in capital expenditure, what they call CapEx. That's the cost of building out the GPU clusters, the data centers, the power grids.
All the plumbing.
All the plumbing. But that colossal investment met with insufficient near-term revenue generation, and that led to a frighteningly low return on invested capital, or ROIC. Wall Street started getting very, very nervous.
Can you put that in a simpler analogy for the listener?
Sure. Think of it this way. The entire tech world decided to build the world's biggest, most advanced factory all at the same time. That's the CapEx. They were all betting that products would just fly off the shelves. But JP Morgan put out this report that just sent a chill through the market. They projected that the $5 trillion being invested globally in AI infrastructure would need to generate $650 billion in annual recurring revenue just to justify that massive mortgage.
And the software market just couldn't deliver that.
It couldn't generate that revenue fast enough. Not even close. And that's when the panic started.
The market divergence that resulted from that panic was stark, wasn't it? Big tech, Microsoft, Google, Meta, they were largely resilient.
They were fine because they could absorb the costs. They integrated AI into their already established, already defensible core revenue streams, like Azure or search or advertising. For them, AI was a feature, not the whole business.
But the rest of the market?
The broader market absolutely hammered the speculative AI startups and stocks. And that so-called circular economy that had propped up these massive valuations, it started to collapse.
Explain that circular economy. It's kind of a shell game, right?
A bit of a shell game. It was simple. Big tech venture arms would invest huge sums into a hot new AI startup. That startup would then immediately turn around and spend that money buying cloud credits back from the very same tech giant.
So the money never really left the building.
Exactly. It just moved from one pocket to another. When that cycle came under scrutiny for its lack of genuine external profit, the whole speculative house of cards began to fall.
And the structural fragility underneath this whole ecosystem was highlighted by one company, NVIDIA's single point of failure.
This is a huge, persistent geopolitical and operational risk that really defined the supply side of 2025. Over 90%, think about that, 90% of all frontier model training, whether it was GPT-5 or Gemini 3, relied exclusively on NVIDIA's high-end hardware, specifically the H100 and the newer Blackwell series chips.
And that created this profound hardware choke.
A hardware choke is the perfect term. If you were a small or even a medium-sized AI startup, you simply could not get your hands on the compute you needed to scale your operations or fine-tune your proprietary models. This just crushed competition and solidified the dominance of the few companies that could afford to pre-purchase entire GPU data centers years in advance.
But the more chilling implication of that hardware dependence is the supply chain vulnerability attached to it.
Yeah. The retort really emphasized the extreme reliance on Taiwan, and specifically on TSMC, for manufacturing these critical state-of-the-art chips. This concentration meant the entire global AI ecosystem was, and still is, vulnerable to a single localized kinetic event or a geopolitical blockade in that region.
And the consequences of that would be catastrophic.
Analysts warn that an event like that would instantly halt AI progress across the entire stack worldwide. It would force this desperate, incredibly costly global diversification effort that most nations simply are not prepared to execute.
So this crunch in hardware access, combined with the market jitters, it led directly to the Great Consolidation, a massive wave of mergers and acquisitions.
M&A completely defined the market's attempt to stabilize itself. And the headline deal, the one that really showed the strategic direction of the entire industry, was undoubtedly Google's acquisition of the cloud security firm Wiz for a staggering $32 billion.
$32 billion. That seems like an astronomical price just for security technology. Why was that specific piece so critical?
Because security was the #1 barrier to enterprise adoption of custom AI models. It was the biggest roadblock. Companies were terrified of moving their most sensitive proprietary data, their secret sauce, their customer lists, their R&D to the cloud for training. They needed absolute guarantees of zero data leakage and airtight security protocols.
So Google essentially bought Wiz to offer that guarantee.
Precisely. It allowed Google to go to the market and offer a fully vertically integrated, secure AI stack. It was a direct challenge to Microsoft Azure, which was already deeply embedded in the enterprise market. The message from the market was clear. The era of the independent, high-flying AI startup was over. The ecosystem bifurcated. You either had the capital to build a defensible integrated stack yourself, or you got acquired by a giant, or you faced bankruptcy.
And while all this high-stakes financial drama was playing out, the impact on human labor moved from a theoretical debate, the fear of robots, to undeniable empirical data about actual job displacement.
The labor market displacement became one of the most painful and tangible realities of 2025. Goldman Sachs put out a report estimating that during this transition period, overall U.S. unemployment would tick up by about 0.5%, with roughly 2.5% of the total U.S. employment force. Millions of people. an immediate risk of direct displacement.
And McKinsey's global data backed this up. They estimated 14 million jobs globally had already been lost or displaced by early 2025 due to rapid AI integration. The scary part is the speed. This wasn't a slow, century-long transition like the Industrial Revolution. This was happening in months.
And what really stands out in the report is where that displacement hit hardest. It was white-collar roles that were previously considered very secure. We saw the elimination of entire customer service teams, administrative processors, entry-level coding jobs, and paralegal research analysis.
So that comforting slogan we heard for years, a person using AI will replace you, not AI itself, that turned out not to be the whole truth.
It was replaced by a much harsher reality.
Yeah.
In workflows that are obsessed with cost reduction and efficiency, the human was often just removed from the loop entirely. It was about elimination, not augmentation. The market, in many cases, optimized for AI efficiency over human employment, especially in those routine, repetitive cognitive tasks.
The economic crash was ugly, but Section 3 of this report covers something almost as brutal. The spectacular failure of a deeply hyped vision. The post-smartphone hardware paradigm. Despite all the breakthroughs in frontier intelligence, 2025 became the year the hardware graveyard just filled up.
Yeah, this section is a masterclass in the difference between technological possibility and actual consumer utility. We have spent decades optimizing the screen-based paradigm and this idea of a voice-first revolution driven by AI. It just fell flat on its face for very specific, very repeatable reasons.
And the ultimate tombstone for that whole vision was the Humane AI pin. After raising hundreds of millions, generating enormous buzz, the company just collapsed.
It did. The device was plagued with problems: overheating, slow latency, and just a basic lack of utility that couldn't compete with a 5-year-old iPhone. The financial consequences of this failure are stark. HP ended up acquiring the company's assets, the OS and the IP, for a mere $116 million.
$116 million. That's less than half of the $240 million in funding they had raised. That is a massive destruction of investor capital.
And the lesson is indelible. Consumers were completely unwilling to trade the visual density, the reliability, and the privacy of their smartphone screen for a voice-only interface that often hallucinated or just failed to execute the most basic functions. The takeaway is that AI is currently succeeding as a powerful feature within established form factors, like the phone or the PC. It is not yet a viable form factor on its own.
And following closely behind it into that graveyard was the highly anticipated Rabbit R1, another case of deception, really.
The R1 was marketed on this big promise of a large action model, a LAM. The idea was that the device could magically navigate and execute tasks across your apps for you, all with a voice command. Consumers really believed they were buying a truly intelligent foundational device.
But the reality was far more brittle, wasn't it?
Oh, it was incredibly brittle. Technical autopsies and user reports very quickly revealed that the device's so-called LAM capability was often just powered by fragile automation scripts, something similar to Playwright scripts. And these would break constantly every time a target app, Uber, Spotify, you name it, updated its user interface.
So it wasn't some breakthrough neural network automation. It was just glorified macro recording that was incredibly prone to failure.
Precisely. And this just reinforced what the industry now calls the reliability gap. If a user has a dedicated phone app that works 100% of the time, they will never choose an AI voice command that only works 80% of the time, no matter how cool the interface looks. Reliability absolutely trumps perceived capability when it comes to fundamental consumer utility.
Then we had the failure that was less about utility and more about cultural and social friction. The friend wearable.
This was a fascinating sociological case study. The device was necklace pendant and is designed to record ambient audio constantly to offer companionship and combat loneliness. The intent, may have been benign.
But the public backlash was instantaneous and severe.
It was. It was widely rejected as fundamental tech creep. The idea of a physical, always listening device constantly recording people around you without their explicit consent. It just drew an immediate sociological boundary.
So even though people accept AI in the private space of their smartphone, they rejected it as an intrusive physical presence.
Absolutely. It was seen as an invasion of public privacy. The boundaries of AI adoption, it turns out, are dictated by social norms and intrusion, not just by technology or cost. And the results reflect that. The startup sold fewer than 1,000 units and quickly had to pivot to a free app model just to survive.
And finally, 2025 saw the brutal wrapper apocalypse. This was a mass extinction event for startups that were basically built on sand.
It was an inevitable and, frankly, healthy market filtering. These are the companies whose only value was a thin, pretty user interface placed over a major API, primarily OpenAI's. They had no proprietary intellectual property, no unique datasets, and absolutely no defensible technological moat.
And when GPT-5 and Gemini 3 started natively integrating all those advanced features like deep PDF analysis, code execution, native data visualization,
The wrapper company's value proposition vanished overnight. Their entire business was just a feature that the big guys decided to turn on. It was a rapid death spiral.
and it filtered out the fakes too.
It did. The market aggressively filtered out companies that weren't building genuine IP. This led to some high-profile scandals and bankruptcies. The report calls out the controversy around Builder.ai, which was revealed to be a Potemkin AI,
Meaning?
meaning it was largely powered by offshore human labor who were just faking the automation to secure venture capital funding. The market ruthlessly punished those who were just renting intelligence versus those who were genuinely building their own intellectual property.
We have to turn now to the most consequential and frankly chilling developments of the year. The shift of AI from a software utility to a critical driver of kinetic action in modern warfare. This is where the consequences became undeniably lethal.
Yeah, 2025 demonstrated that the philosophical debate over lethal autonomous weapon systems, or LAWD-LQSS, is great. It's effectively over. They are deployed, they are decisive, and they are setting the new standard for the pace and the nature of modern conflict.
We saw this most clearly in Ukraine, where the war evolved into what the report calls a fully autonomous battlefield. Because of Russia's intense electronic warfare, which severed the traditional human pilot connections to reconnaissance and strike drones, the necessity of autonomy became paramount. It was about survival.
This operational necessity drove incredibly rapid technological innovation. Ukraine deployed swarms of AI-enabled drones that were capable of terminal guidance. That means the ability to lock onto a target and execute the final striking phase of the flight without any human intervention whatsoever. They had to remove the human from the loop because the electromagnetic environment demanded it. The signal was already gone.
The report highlights a crucial example of this: the Subsea Baby autonomous underwater vehicle, an AUV. It struck a Russian Kilo-class submarine. This wasn't just a remotely piloted torpedo.
Not at all. It was a fully autonomous system. It navigated via a series of complex waypoints and used visual recognition to evade traditional defenses and find its target.
And just as critical as the technology was the sheer scale of their domestic industrial capacity. Ukrainian companies like Firepoint were producing 200 autonomous strike drones per day.
And they secure their supply chains by removing dependencies on Chinese components, which was a huge strategic move. They demonstrated this agile, high-throughput manufacturing capability that just redefined the pace of modern conflict. The threshold was unequivocally crossed. The human in the loop is now officially a concept of the past. It's been replaced by human on the loop, or increasingly human out of the loop.
Meanwhile, the use of AI targeting systems in the Middle East, specifically Israel's development of a Lavender system, it sparked this intense global legal and policy debate.
The controversy here focused squarely on delegation of targeting authority to an algorithm. Investigations reveal that the machine learning system, Lavender, was used by the IDF for identifying suspected militants. Now, the system generated thousands of targets. But the critical detail that caused global alarm was that it did so with an algorithmically determined tolerance for collateral damage.
And that tolerance factor is what industrialized the targeting process.
Exactly. It created this incredibly dangerous phenomenon that the report calls the speed versus precision paradox. The system allows militaries to strike much, much faster than human analysts could ever verify the target's legitimacy, which offers resource efficiency. But it comes at the undeniable cost of eroding the principle of distinction in international humanitarian law. It raises these profound questions about relying on automated judgment in life and death decisions, especially when algorithmic bias might be baked into the system.
Moving from the battlefield to geopolitics, 2025 was the year the great powers tried to define the future rules of engagement. And China made a huge strategic maneuver by releasing its action plan for global AI governance in July.
This was a clear and very clever attempt to define the digital architecture for half the planet. China positioned itself as the technology partner of choice for the global South countries in Asia, Africa, Latin America. They started offering compute infrastructure and data centers, essentially implementing an AI Belt and Road initiative.
So the goal wasn't just development aid. It was about locking in technological and regulatory influence.
It was entirely about setting technical standards. See, China enforced these very strict domestic regulations on its own generative AI, requiring things like watermarking, source transparency, and security assessments to solidify this distinct sovereign AI ecosystem. By exporting the physical infrastructure and its accompanying governance model, China is threatening to bifurcate the global internet into two incompatible AI stacks, one Western, one Chinese. This isn't just a Cold War over chips anymore, it's a foundational battle for the future operating system of the planet.
Now for the bad news concerning digital security and identity. 2025 was the year the crisis of digital trust breached institutional security and proved the entire information ecosystem was just catastrophically unprepared for the speed and sophistication of synthetic media.
The sophistication of deepfakes just jumped from being a sort of novelty, a curiosity, to an operational financial threat. The watershed moment for global corporate security was the $25 million deepfake CFO heist at the engineering firm Erupt in Hong Kong.
Let's detail this because the specifics are terrifying. This wasn't just a fake email or a spoofed phone call.
No. An employee was tricked into transferring $25 million after attending a full video conference call where, and this is the critical part, every other participant, including the company's CFO and other senior executives, was an AI-generated interactive deepfake.
So the employee was having a conversation.
A real-time conversation, actively communicating, responding, even debating with entirely fabricated identities.
And that detail, the interactive element, that's what shattered traditional security protocols overnight.
It rendered standard verification methods like voice checks or even quick video calls completely obsolete. Deepfakes achieved real-time, sustained conversational capability that could execute these incredibly complex social engineering scams. The global financial sector was forced into a panic, radically overhauling approval protocols, and in many cases reverting to analog physical security methods like using physical tokens or requiring in-person verification just to ensure basic transaction security.
And at the same time, this crisis of truth slammed into our democratic processes. The German federal election in February 2025 became a primary target for this kind of AI-driven hybrid warfare.
We saw this viral deepfake video of the CDU leader, Friedrich Merz, making these highly inflammatory and damaging statements. It was then rapidly amplified by known Russian-affiliated networks, specifically using their persistent doppelganger campaign architecture.
The long-term consequence of these kinds of attacks is what analysts are now calling the liar's dividend.
The liar's dividend is the systematic erosion of public trust that is engineered by deepfakes. It means that when a genuine scandal happens, when a politician is actually caught on tape doing something corrupt or damaging, they can instantly dismiss it. They can just point to the election deepfakes and say, it's all fake news, just like that other video.
It creates systemic doubt.
Exactly. It allows the guilty to hide behind this generalized distrust in all digital media. And this contagion spread globally. We saw a high-fidelity deepfake video claiming a military coup against French President Macron. Canadian intelligence issued warnings about high likelihood interference from China and India using AI to target their diaspora communities during election cycles. This crisis of epistemology, of simply knowing what is real, is now a core global security concern.
This lack of preparation in the digital realm, it extended to the judicial and political sphere as well, leading to a massive legal preemption battle right here in the United States.
Yeah, this focused on the Trump executive order that was signed on December 11, 2025. It was titled, Ensuring a National Policy Framework for Artificial Intelligence.
And what was the central argument the federal government used to justify nationalizing AI policy and overriding the states?
It was framed as a decisive, deregulatory move to ensure U.S. innovation could dominate against China. The order specifically targeted state-level AI safety laws, most notably attempts by California to impose things like mandatory safety testing, bias audits, and open model weights. The federal government's position was that these were onerous regulations that would stifle competition and hand the advantage to Beijing.
And the mechanism for enforcement was highly aggressive, setting up this massive constitutional battle over federalism.
Indeed. The order directed the Department of Justice to immediately sue any states that enacted these regulations. Furthermore, and this was maybe the bigger threat, it threatened to withhold critical federal funding, like the BEAD broadband grants, from any non-compliant states. This firmly placed the federal government's innovation imperative against state-level safety and regulatory concerns. It guaranteed a constitutional showdown.
Meanwhile, the long-running copyright battles saw a partial truce on one front and a stubborn stalemate on another. Let's start with the truce between Universal Music Group and Udio.
Right. Universal Music Group settled its major copyright lawsuit with the AI music generator Udio in October of 2025. This wasn't a total legal victory for artists, not by a long shot, but it was a pragmatic business solution that sets a crucial precedent. Udio agreed to move to a licensing model.
Which sounds like it sets up two distinct generative media markets for the future.
It absolutely does. You're now going to have the clean, licensed, and expensive models for commercial use, where the rights holders are actually compensated, and then you'll have the wild models operating in the underground, trained on scraped, legally risky data. The era of just scraping copyrighted material to move fast and break things is ending. It's being replaced by the business necessity to license, compensate, and monetize.
But the shadow over the entire industry, the sword of Damocles, that remains the New York Times versus OpenAI case.
That lawsuit just ground on through the entire year without any resolution. While the court dismissed several of the peripheral claims, the core copyright infringement claim, the fundamental argument over whether training an LLM constitutes fair use, that remains alive.
And there was a complication, wasn't there?
A huge one. The process was further complicated by the revelation that the New York Times had secretly deleted evidence of its own internal use of generative AI, which severely damaged its narrative of victimhood and its standing in court.
So the complexity of establishing actual monetary harm and defining what fair use even means in the context of mass data extraction, the judicial system just couldn't resolve it quickly.
That's the stalemate. Many analysts now believe the issue is actually too complex for judicial resolution at all. A legislative solution, a new law that defines new copyright boundaries for the age of AI, that might be the only viable path forward for the LLM industry.
Okay, to close out this deep dive, let's pivot back to the immense positive potential, the ultimate intellectual resource. Because while all the chaos of wars and market crashes was playing out, AI was also quietly serving as this critical force, solving some of humanity's largest, most existential problems in 2025.
It's so true. Amidst all the geopolitical tension and the economic fear, AI was validating the highest hopes we ever had for the technology, particularly in the fields of energy and climate.
Let's discuss AI as the fusion catalyst. Google DeepMind partnered with Commonwealth Fusion Systems, or CFS, and they were focusing on fusion energy, the long-standing dream of limitless clean power.
The foundational physical problem with fusion energy has always been control. You have to control plasma that is hotter than the sun inside a magnetic field. Human operators, or traditional computer systems, they just cannot react fast enough to the rapid, microsecond-level disruptions that cause the reaction to collapse. The instability outpaces any mechanical or human response.
And AI provided the necessary speed to solve that.
Through deep reinforcement learning, the AI demonstrated the ability to predict and then counteract those plasma instabilities in mere milliseconds. This ability to stabilize the reaction environment, it dramatically accelerates the path to net energy gain. The Department of Energy cited this specific partnership as a critical accelerator that could potentially bring fusion energy to the grid by the 2030s. We're essentially using machine intelligence to hack the complex physics of clean energy generation.
Moving from energy generation to environmental prediction, NOAA's weather prediction underwent a total transformation in 2025.
NOAA deployed the AIGFS, the Artificial Intelligence Global Forecast System. And this represents a massive paradigm shift away from the traditional brute force physics-based simulations, which require petabytes of historical data and incredible amounts of supercomputing power, to purely data-driven modeling.
And the efficiency gains here, they're staggering, almost unbelievable in their magnitude.
They are. The AI models delivered demonstrably more accurate forecasts, especially when it came to predicting extreme events, while using 99.7% less computing power than the traditional numerical models.
Better accuracy with that massive reduction in compute, that's a generational leap.
It is, and what that massive efficiency enabled was large-scale ensemble forecasting. Because the compute cost was suddenly so low, they could run thousands of different scenario simulations, these ensemble runs, to predict the probable path and intensity of extreme weather events, like hurricanes or tornadoes. This drastically improved early warning systems.
And that saves lives.
It's projected to save thousands of lives annually through more precise and more timely disaster warnings.
Finally, let's look at the impact on human potential. The personalized learning pivot in education. AI moved from being seen as the ultimate cheating tool in schools to being a legitimate, highly effective, personalized tutor.
Yeah, controlled studies throughout 2025 demonstrated the profound effectiveness of these personalized AI tutors. They tracked student progress and found that students who were utilizing these systems consistently raised their grades from, say, C averages all the way up to B-plus averages. This wasn't minor optimization. This was meaningful educational acceleration.
So that promise we've heard for so long, a highly competent, customized tutor for every child, it's technically feasible now.
It is technically feasible, but the report stresses the immediate and very serious downside. This success story simultaneously deepened the digital divide. Students in well-funded school districts who had access to and could afford the superior, paid frontier models like GPT 5.2, they saw these massive gains.
Well, while others got left behind.
While students in less funded areas relied on less capable free models or had no access at all, the promise of educational equality is now directly tied to economic access to the most sophisticated frontier intelligence. And it's exacerbating existing educational inequalities almost instantly.
So as we survey this full complex tapestry of 2025, the year of consequence, what stands out is this profound paradox. On one hand, we mastered the creation of sophisticated intelligence. You see that in the deep reasoning power of GPT-5 and the economic speed of Gemini 3.
But on the other hand, we struggled deeply with its containment. We saw that with the Arab heist and the flood of interactive deepfakes.
We failed to nail down its governance, pitting the Trump executive order against China's global action plan. And we are still wrestling with its brutal economics, defined by that capex cliff and the mass labor displacement.
The central dichotomy is just unavoidable. This technology is no longer a neutral utility. It has immediately become a primary geopolitical asset, a lethal weapon of war, a rapid catalyst for scientific creation, and a ruthless disruptor of traditional labor markets.
And the report concluded that the key tension moving into 2026 will not be a simplistic debate of human versus AI,
but rather AI-enabled entities versus non-AI entities. The organizations, the nations, the individuals who survived the 2025 reckoning, the consolidated tech giants, the autonomous warfighters, the science labs powered by AlphaFold 4, they are leaner, faster, and critically more lethal in every sense of the word, and they are leaving the non-enabled entities scrambling to catch up.
The future has arrived.
It has, but it is deeply and unevenly distributed, and it is heavily armed. The data we reviewed on the capex fragility, the hardware choke, and the mass labor displacement. It all paints a very clear picture. The AI-enabled entities are pulling away from the pack at an accelerating and perhaps irreversible rate.
Which raises the final provocative thought for you to mull over as we move into 2026. If the economic and intellectual gap created by access to frontier-level AI capability is widening this rapidly, and if governments are actively deregulating the technology to spur innovation, what will be the inevitable political and sociological response? What mechanisms beyond traditional government legislation will emerge to bridge that growing gap and ensure equitable access to the very tools that now define modern survival and prosperity in this newly bifurcated world?
Something to think about as this great rapid transition continues.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the pivotal year of 2025.